I'm out there on the islands.
Thank you.
And it was a perfect place to sort of like sit with the Chris Paul signing. It was because, as you know, I left here going, man, this
you were
is
seasick.
It's just going to be hard to do, and I'm sort of finding myself annoyed by the way all the Warrior world is talking about it. Because, and I get their perspective is different. Draymond Green, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson are not Warrior fans. They're Warriors. They see this as being on the inside of a fraternity, and Chris Paul is a very high-level member of said NBA fraternity. So there's this respect there, and you think about, why the way he passes and thinks his way, like this is going to be good for us. And us fans, admittedly irrationally, are like, gross. I don't want him anywhere near our jerseys. So it's difficult to listen I'm finding it's difficult to listen to some of the players talk about just acquiring Chris Paul. They're like, yeah, we got this great player. And so they see it very, very differently. And the islands were kind of a good place to just tap out and go, okay, what makes sense and what doesn't? And there are certain things I find now sort of intriguing and certain things that I find terrifying about Chris Paul being on the Golden State Warriors.
Well, the terrifying part's easy to diagnose. It's terrifying to think about, there goes the hammy, or there goes the groin. That, to me, is the most terrifying part of whatever is terrifying you.
Well, it's also terrifying to hear Draymond Green say things like, I can learn how to be a better leader by being around Chris Paul. Because I happen to think, having never been led by Chris Paul, but watching others who have, he might have his own things to learn about leadership. He is like a Bobby Knight style leader in some ways. He is
I love it.
He is a Kobe Bryant style leader. And a leader like that usually needs a good cop to go with his bad cop.
Draymond Green.
And the Warriors now have two bad cops.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they've got a good cop, and that's terrifying.
Well, Steve Kerr would be that figure, and you've got Steph and Klay, who have always been the good cop, to use your analogy to Draymond Green's, quote, bad cop. I think they've always been sort of that counterpoint in terms of leadership, and they do things differently than Draymond Green, certainly. I can't imagine that Chris Paul is going to come in here and be as assertive as he's been in other spots. I can't imagine
I'm
that.
starting to wonder, what do you think about all the whispers of him actually starting and Looney going to the bench?
I don't like it. I
Neither do I.
I don't think it helps their team very much.
I also think there's an emotional aspect to that. Like if you're a Warrior fan and you've already got a problem with CP3 and he comes in and now suddenly an absolute fan darling gets kicked to the bench and the Warriors get shorter, I don't know.
But if it works, I don't think Warrior fans will care because Kevon Looney won't care. And it's not like Kevon Looney has always been a starter. I think a more dramatic move would be if Klay Thompson went to the bench. And we know that Klay Thompson's not coming off the bench. We're not doing the bench if you're Klay Thompson. So if Kevon comes off the bench, I really don't think the Warrior fans would be that affected by it because we've seen it so many different times before.
So Day, as many of you now know, a guest on Podcast P. That's with Paul George. And here is the comment to which I was referring a couple of minutes ago.
In 2019, obviously, we lost in the finals, and then KD left, and Klay got hurt, and then Steph got hurt 2 games. Sean got traded away. Sean retired. Andre got traded away. All our vets left. So all of a sudden, I went from the young guy on the team to year 8 of thrown into the fire of being this mentor. And I've always been a mentor. That's what it is. But being a vet is a totally different thing than being a mentor.
Right.
And so then I just start trying to learn how to be a vet on the fly. And to have someone there that I can continue to watch and learn from, I'm actually looking forward to because I know that that's something that I need to continue to, an area
I want to see it. I can't wait. Very interesting.
Okay, so I'm intrigued and I'm terrified. Because here's what I mean by that. I'm intrigued because I was thinking about this, especially since what Draymond's talking about, 2018, 2019. Has there ever been, in the Steph, Klay, Dre era, has there ever been a player voice in the locker room that sort of carries that intimidating weight like a Draymond Green? Has there ever been anyone else that's in the locker room while Draymond was also here?
Maybe David West, but I would imagine that David was probably doing it in a different way in terms of the actual voice. David West,
that's a good name.
Well, as a figure, as a veteran, and the player that he was, and he's more of an OG than Draymond Green is in terms of the way he went about getting double-doubles back when Draymond was still in Saginaw. I think that he came in and commanded that same presence. Sean Livingston, to a different example, he was more on the side of the Steph and Clay, like lead by example, quiet leadership. But to me, David West would be probably the closest thing to it.
So, I'm intrigued by that aspect of this, where Chris Paul might be the only or one of the few who sort of could check Draymond. That's a better way to ask the question. Has there ever been anyone in the last 6 or 7 years who could check Draymond when he gets out of line? Because he does. Has there ever been anyone? And I would argue, David West's a good name.
KD tried, but we saw how that worked out.
And now he's gone. Right. Yeah. Now, 3 teams later, here we go, and so I'm intrigued by that aspect of what Chris Paul can bring. The part, though, that's terrifying is related to the part that's intriguing, which is that it's now bad cop and worse cop, and both of them are old or older, and probably are going to want load management. I don't know how much tolerance they've got for the young players. Look what happened last year. Here's Draymond admitting that he barely knows what to do with Jonathan Kuminga, and obviously was at the center of a relationship completely gone wrong with Jordan Poole. I don't think Draymond's got something against young players, but obviously that's a difficult thing to navigate depending on how the young players react to it. And so now you've got Draymond 1 and Draymond 2. And it's hard enough to have Draymond 1 in the locker room. So that part, to me, that's going to be a little bit difficult for Steve Kerr to navigate sometimes.
But if Chris Paul teaches Draymond exactly how he can relate to younger players, because that's what Draymond talked about with Chris Paul in one of his cuts from Podcast P, was what CP did for DeAndre Ayton. DeAndre Ayton was, heading toward being a bust. No disrespect to DeAndre Ayton is what Draymond Green said, but Chris Paul was able to get the most out of him. So can Draymond lead? Can Draymond learn from Chris Paul about how to lead young players? Because Draymond clearly didn't do that last year.
Gosh, Kuminga might end up being the key to the whole thing, huh? It is an interesting name because he is the one who we talked for weeks, like maybe he gets paired with Poole in a big deal. And I think the Warriors probably had that option. Like, we know how many calls they made about Jordan Poole, and I don't think they got the answers that they were looking for. And I bet some of those teams said, you know who you're asking about? Like, well, what about Kuminga? What about that? Then maybe we can have a conversation about an Anunoby or a Siakam or whoever they were calling Boston about and all that. Jaylen Brown. What about Kuminga? The Warriors said no. The Warriors would rather take a 38-year-old on a 1-year deal than somebody better, because they wanted to keep Kuminga. And we're all sitting here going, okay, who's the youthful leader? Who can give 18 points off the bench on nights, especially when Steph, Clay, Dre are out or not shooting well or whatever? Man, he's got to be that guy. Who else can play that role this year?
He's the key. Moses Moody also making that third-year leap. And you look at what Jordan Poole did in his third year. You look at Jonathan Kuminga. If he can take a third-year leap like Jordan Poole did, I'm not saying he's going to get you 20 a night, but if he can take that big step forward, all of a sudden you may have action in April.
Yeah, that's an interesting name. I do like him.